Alberta is introducing legislation to make it easier to separate from Canada. Are they one step closer to doing so? Welcome to my channel, y'all. I hope you're having a great day. Now, before we get into the video, I'd like to remind you to like and subscribe and share this out with as many people as possible. YouTube is suppressing my videos, so let's get it out there so that people can see this content. Also, if you reside on Vancouver Island, I am setting up a couple of courses for the Canadian Firearms Safety Course. The first one is in May the 24th and the 25th, and the second one is currently set for July the 26th and the 27th. If you think that either of those courses would suit you or you'd like to join in, go to my website. There are links in the show notes of this video, and you can sign up for one. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into this content. So the big news since the election is that Danielle Smith has introduced legislation which would make it easier for Albertans to vote in a referendum to separate from Canada. Let's go to a press conference that she held the day after the election, and then we'll talk about it.
We are expanding opportunities for Albertans to be involved in direct democracy by making changes to the threshold needed for successful citizens' initiatives. The signature collection time for citizens' initiatives will be extended from 90 days to 120 days. We are also improving the process by setting the threshold to be 10% of the number of eligible voters who participated in the last general election, as opposed to being either 10 or 20% of total registered voters.
So what that means is you have more time to collect signatures and you need less signatures. So the 20% of eligible voters set the threshold at around 600,000 people, but they're not saying that it is just 10% of eligible voters. It's now 10% of eligible voters, or the number of eligible voters who participated in the last Alberta general election. So that drops the number significantly. It actually drops it down to 177,000, or less than 1/3 of what it was before. So that's significant. It's going to allow more initiatives to get on the ballot, potentially. And of course, some reporters had a few questions about this.
Yeah, Premier, it's the day after a federal election, and this press release uses the word referendum or referendums, I think around 6 times. So is this something you're considering? And if so, what's the timing?
Well, we would have introduced this legislation a little bit earlier. We've been working on it, had a few final tweaks to make. We were going to introduce it regardless of what the outcome of the election was. It just so happens that this is the timing now that we're back from a week from constituency break. We knew that there were just some tweaks that we needed to make in certain areas. We had made promises about how we would revise some of the elections laws, and so it's just a matter of making sure that we're bringing that, just making those commitments. It's the timing is just what the timing is. We were always intending to bring this forward.
While it's clear that this legislation does make it easier for citizen-driven initiatives such as a referendum for separation, that's not all this legislation does. It actually opens the door for all referendums, not just for separation. But of course, we all suspect that it has a lot to do with allowing citizens to bring forward a separation referendum. And of course, this reporter does as well.
Yeah, just following up on some of my colleagues' questions, the word referendum mentioned several times throughout this legislation. Just wondering, into the Premier, those 9 demands that you outlined, I think within 6 months you said you wanted to see some action on them. What if you don't see that action? What then? And is the door open to a referendum on separation?
Well, I live in hope. I mean, the very first conversation I had with Justin Trudeau when I got elected was to talk about how we could align around a reasonable timeline for an emissions reduction target that wouldn't devastate our industry. And my very first conversation with Prime Minister Carney was the same thing. And I'm going to have a renewed conversation with him about that. And so he's given the impression, certainly with the interactions he's had with me and the Council of the Federation, that he is open to establishing economic corridors that include pipelines. And I have to believe that if you're intending to create more markets, build more pipelines, you will need to have oil and gas to fill them. So you cannot have policy that suppresses the development of resources at the same time as you're trying to expand the development of resources. So we'll have a very interesting conversation over the next 6 months. I don't want to prejudge the outcome, but that's what we'll be advocating for.
This morning's statement, I mean, you're talking about hope and optimism in your answer just now, but this morning there was words like hostile and protecting the province. I guess how optimistic are you about the relationship with the new Prime Minister? Are you feeling hopeful that this could be a new relationship between Alberta and Ottawa?
Well, it very much depends. I mean, we had a cabinet that he went into the election with that was exactly the same as the cabinet that subjected Alberta to 10 years of economic devastation. So whether or not he, as a leader, is going to be able to change course remains to be seen. He's given some undertakings, but he said different things in different forums to different people in different parts of the country. So I don't know the answer yet. I made it very clear what I think he needs to do to reset the relationship with Alberta. I think what we put on the table is very reasonable and very much in sync with the idea of being an energy superpower and finding new markets. And I guess the ball will be in his court to see how he responds to that.
Well played, Danielle Smith. Of course, she can't commit to putting a referendum of separation before the people. And that's not what this legislation is about. This legislation is about allowing the citizens to drive a particular issue so that they can put forward a referendum for separation if they so desired. As a First Minister, it would be very unseemly for her to say that she wants to separate from Confederation. No, she's instead saying that she believes that Alberta should have more sovereignty within Confederation, within the union that is Canada, if you could put it that way. So I think this was well done on Danielle Smith's part. I think that the reporter was trying to trap her, and she sidestepped that quite well.
I realize you're not advocating for Alberta separation, separatism, independence, or anything like that, but what is your reaction to the fact that the level of frustration among many Albertans has gotten so strong that some people are at least talking about, thinking about, pondering, debating an option such as leaving Canada? Well, what is your reaction to that?
Well, I think Albertans are hurt and betrayed. That's how I think Albertans are feeling. I think Canada as a whole got a sense of that feeling of hurt and betrayal with the way the Americans are treating us right now. But we've been treated that way for the last 10 years. Treated like our interests don't matter. Treated like our economic imperatives aren't important. Treated like we should be just shut up and just be satisfied with whatever the central government decides to do, regardless of whether it's constitutional or not. I think that's what you were seeing in this last election. And I think Albertans want to share my view that we want to be able to have Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. But we also would like to see Team Canada be on Team Alberta for once. And that's what, when I say I live in hope that that's going to happen, it hasn't happened for the last 10 years. And so that's part of the reason why I think Albertans are frustrated. I think that they were hoping for a big change, and they didn't get it last night. So I'm going to do what I can to work with the current government, as I always have, to find areas of common agreement and to try to address those things that have been causing some of that feeling of betrayal and hurt. And hopefully we'll be able to forge a stronger approach with our fellow premiers, and a recognition from the federal government that they've got to honor the Constitution.
And of course, we all know that Trudeau didn't like to honor the Constitution. He just kind of trampled all over our rights with the trucker convoy and all the COVID things that went down. But of course, that's history. But we still have to learn from it, don't we? Because if we don't learn from history, we are destined to repeat it. So I thought that this was a very good response to this question. Of course, Alberta feels betrayed and Alberta feels used. And I think that's a very big part of this new legislation, because now Albertans can voice their opinion more easily. And yes, it may lead to a referendum on separation, and that in and of itself could bring a lot more respect from Ottawa. After all, look what it did for Quebec. I've gotten a lot of responses to some of my videos on the possibility of Alberta separating, and a lot of people are very pro and a lot of people are very skeptical. A lot of people say that they would like to see it. A lot of people say that they wouldn't like to see it, but there's always a bunch of people who say that it's impossible, that the Constitution won't allow it, that the king would somehow intervene, which the king doesn't have any power, really. He hasn't, kings and queens have not had power for centuries, but that's beside the point. I think that it's important now to go to somebody who actually knows what he's talking about, and this is a constitutional lawyer named Keith Wilson out of Alberta, and he's talking to Candace Malcolm from Juno News. So let's go and see exactly what he says about this new legislation and really about how unique it is within the world, or how unique Canada is within the world for even allowing such a proposal to be put forward.
I think it's really important to understand why we're even talking about the concept of referendum in this discussion, which is Canada is a very unique country in the world in terms of democracies, in that most countries do not have, and by most I mean just about all, do not have a mechanism where legally a region of a country, a province, or a state can hold a vote, a referendum, and decide they no longer want to be part of that country. This is exceptionally rare in democracies, to have in the constitutional jurisprudence a mechanism for a province in Canada to hold a vote. And of course, it all emanates from the 1998 reference case regarding Quebec succession, when Quebec was going to hold a referendum. So that's why we're talking about a referendum, is that Canada has this unique phenomena at law where a region, namely a province, can hold a referendum. So the question becomes, well, how does any province hold a referendum? Well, interestingly, each provincial legislature gets to decide what referendum laws they're going to have, if any. And Alberta has had a referendum law in the books for a very long time, and it basically says that the cabinet, the provincial cabinet, can decide to hold a referendum on separation or independence. But the Kenney government, under the UCP prior to Premier Smith, brought in legislation for citizen-initiated referendum, where if the citizens assemble sufficient signatures on a petition, essentially, that will compel the government to hold the referendum. So either the people can force the provincial government's hand to compel a referendum on independence, or the cabinet itself can decide to call one. The problem was that under the Citizen Initiative Act, they had two bars. If you wanted to get a policy changed or legislation changed in a particular area, you had one bar, which was 10%. But if you wanted a constitutional amendment, it was higher, it was 20%, had all these other hurdles that you had to overcome. And the government and Premier Smith took the position that she announced yesterday, that there should be one standard. If the citizens decide they want to compel government to act, there should be one standard. So she brought the constitutional standard down to the other standard. The practical effect is that prior to these amendments announced yesterday, in order to force the Alberta government to hold a referendum on separation, we would have had to have, in 90 days, got 600,000 signatures. Now we have 120 days to get 177,000. So we've gone from 600,000 signatures down to 177, and the amount of time has gone from 90 days to 120 days. So it's a very viable target, I believe.
So for all the skeptics out there, we have it straight from a constitutional lawyer. This is possible. It is very possible that this initiative can be brought forward, or an initiative of this nature. But what does he say about what would happen if the Alberta citizens actually voted to separate from Canada? Let's go back to this interview with Juno News and see what he had to say.
Under the Supreme Court of Canada ruling codified in the Federal Clarity Act is that the referendum, so let's just say for argument's sake that things do move that quickly, and there is a provincial referendum on separation in Alberta in October in conjunction with our municipal elections, province-wide. What would then happen is if that passed in the affirmative, with a clear majority of Albertans on a clear question, then it triggers a positive legal duty on the federal government, the provincial governments, and First Nations to enter into negotiations with Alberta as to the terms of Alberta leaving Confederation. No one can sit it out. No one has a veto. They can't just say, well, I'm not coming. The First Nations can't say, no way, we're not interested. They have to participate. That's what the law is in Canada, as confirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada. And the details will be worked on. It may be for the First Nations that they decide they want to keep their lands federal, and there'll be these little enclaves and continue to be ruled and administered by Ottawa. But that hasn't worked out so well for them either, for many of them. They may want to and Alberta could step into the shoes in the treaties and honor them, or they may want to negotiate a whole new relationship. That would all be on the table. And part of that agreement would include each province agreeing to pass a resolution in their legislature confirming the terms of separation and succession, which would then meet the requirements for amending the Constitution. That is a step.
So it would likely be a fairly long process. If Alberta did vote to separate, then they would enter into all of these agreements. And if Saskatchewan voted at the same time to separate, well, then there's two negotiations happening at the same time. And it would probably take, I would say, at least 6 months, probably even longer, possibly even a couple of years before everything is settled. But then there's a wild card, and he talks about this next.
But then we got the wild card. Donald J. Trump, real estate mogul, likes to acquire things. Alberta has the third largest reserves of oil and gas. We have most of our cattle that's produced all goes to the United States. A lot of agricultural products go to the United States. We have a north-south trade, not an east-west trade, in terms of our economy. He could be stepping in at various times as he tends to, and he may make some kind of offer that will completely change the dynamic of the sentiment in Alberta, as well as the negotiations with the rest of Canada.
So the bottom line here is that separation is actually possible. It's possible under the Constitution of Canada, and it has been confirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada. So there's no obstacle there. They just have to get the appropriate number of signatures to trigger a referendum, and then they can have a vote on it. Now, since the number of signatures has been reduced and the time to gather them has been expanded, well, they also have that additional time to convince people that separation would be a good idea. So this could be more likely than you might think. And then, of course, after the referendum is triggered, they'll have that period of time for however long that is, 30 days, 90 days, whatever, to convince people to vote in the way that they want to vote. So I think it very much is possible. Will it happen? Well, that's still yet to be seen. I think that there is a growing sentiment in Alberta and Saskatchewan and in the interior of British Columbia for that to happen. So it's really only a matter of time to see whether it will or not. Remember, this will be a long process, but I'm thinking that we shouldn't discount it right away. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to know what you think. Put your comments down below. And while you're at it, please like this video, share with your friends and on social media. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell notification so you never miss another video. Also, please join me on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific time, both on YouTube and Rumble for my live stream, where you're invited to join in on the conversation. Finally, if you wish to get your Canadian firearms license, I teach the required courses. So if you would like to take a course from me and you reside on Vancouver Island, there are links in the show notes of this video to my website where you can sign up for one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.